In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about the impacts of every decision made by every individual in their day-to-day life on the society as a whole.
Humanism, existentialism, and phenomenology, they're all kind of clumped together. Brilliant theorists, I think. A lot of this came out in the 1950s. You might as well, you could think about it in some sense as the precursor to positive psychology, except that positive psychology has no grounding either in psychology or philosophy, whereas existentialism has good grounding in both. And it's not naive. You know, the existentialists believed that, well, I'll clump them together for the purpose of this brief exposition. The first thing that this group of thinkers asks you to consider, and this is a hard thing to do, but if you can do it, it's really worthwhile, is forget about your normal conceptions, your formal conceptions of what constitutes reality, and play this game instead. It's like it's an axiom shift. Instead of thinking that reality is the objective world and you're like a superfluous subjective observer, a transient subjective observer, imagine that what reality is what you experience. That's it. So everything you experience is equally real, although there are different categories of real, right? I mean, a dream is not in the same category as the chair that you're sitting on. But from the phenomenological point of view, a dream and an emotion is just as real a phenomena as the chair is real. Okay, so that's the first axiom. The game is sort of, well, what if we make that assumption? So you make that assumption. The next issue is, what are the essential qualities of what you experience? And that can be addressed in a variety of ways. One of the most important things that the existentialists are concerned about is fundamental anxiety. So this group of thinkers would say, well, you exist within this domain of experience, and one of the phenomena that's most manifest within that domain is the feeling of anxiety or dread. That's a Kierkegaardian idea. It's that as in an experience constituted like yours, which is somewhat fragile, which knows its limits, it's localized in time and space, the fundamental negative meaning in some sense is anxiety and dread. And then the question is, given that that's the fundamental reality, what do you do about it? And so the existentialist idea in sense is, observe your existence, find those elements of being that support you and pursue them. And that will counterbalance the primary feeling of dread and alienation and anxiety and allow you to exist in a manner that makes existence at least bearable. So, if you look at the Freudians, for example, the Freudians sort of think that if there's something wrong with you, there's a reason. So if you were just a normal person, you'd be okay. And since you're not a normal person, something went wrong. Whereas the existentialists, they take the opposite idea. They say, look, you're screwed from day one. That's just how it is. Because like, look at you. You're flawed, you're finite, and there's 1,000 things, 1,000,000 things that you don't know, and all sorts of things that are conspiring to do you in. It's like, with a problem like that, you don't need more problems to be unstable. You're just unstable to begin with. So they conceive of negative emotion related pathology as an integral part of being. And then the question is, okay, given that, it's like the Buddhist idea that life is suffering. It's the same idea. It's like, don't be wondering why you're pathological. It's obvious why you're pathological. How could you help but be pathological? The question is, given that, what should you do about it? Or even, is there anything you can do about it? And that's the question that we'll try to unfold in this section of the course. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about this group of thinkers, I think, is that, especially the later ones, like, well, I include Solzhenitsyn as a personality theorist for reasons that I won't talk to you about now. Solzhenitsyn was a Russian author, and he wrote a book called The Gulag Archipelago, which was published in the 1970s, and it was one of the things that knocked over the Soviet Union, because it revealed for the first time just how corrupt and murderous the Soviet system was. Now, the thing that's interesting about Solzhenitsyn, and also about Frankl, Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who'd been put in the Nazi death camps, is that they were very integrally concerned with the idea of the intrinsic meaningfulness and meaninglessness of human life, one thing. So that's the personal element. But the second thing they were concerned about, and this sort of made them logical followers of Nietzsche, was what effect does your decision about the meaning of your life have on the broader social community? So let's say that you're nihilistic or you're totalitarian. So what does that mean? Like, you're not an isolated unit, you're interacting with people all the time. You have a tremendous network of connections. You know, you can think of it this way. You know 1,000 people. Each of those 1,000 people knows 1,000 people. That means you're one person from 1,000,000 and 2 from 1,000,000,000. So instead of being some little localized dot in a random array of dots, 7 billion of them, you're the center of a connected network. And so if there's something that's gone astray with your psychic functioning, your psychological functioning, what exactly does that do to the broader social community? And Solzhenitsyn's idea, and Frankl's as well, it's quite straightforward, is the reason that societies become pathological, deeply, murderously pathological, is because individuals within the society have become deeply and murderously pathological. So instead of society in, which is something that the Marxists would think, for example, you know, that you're the pawn of social forces, the existentialists would say, don't be so sure about that. It's the quality of the individual decisions that you make on a personal level, day to day, that spread out into the broader community and either improve it or pathologize it. And so I'm going to have you read both Frankl and Solzhenitsyn because I think they make viciously powerful arguments that that is in fact the case. And it's actually quite a useful, it's a funny thing, because often, this is sort of associated with the idea of facing dragons. Often you learn the things that are most vital to your being by considering the worst possible phenomena. So I might say, well, just think about this. It's like the idea that Frankl and Solzhenitsyn, and others, by the way, have been propagating is that whatever decisions you make that are moral on a day-to-day basis aren't isolated to you. They spread out into the community very rapidly. And so the fate of the community is dependent in some sense on your personal morality. So then, well, that's a terrible thing. I mean, it's a terrible weight. But it certainly provides an answer to, well, why should I do what I do? It's like, do good things? Great, they propagate. Do bad things? Fine, they propagate too. And one of the really interesting things about the existentialists is they took a look at what happened in the 20th century with its ungodly, murderous political systems and said, all right, just exactly what responsibility does the individual bear for bringing those conditions about? It's like, it's a question well worth thinking about, and it certainly hasn't lost its relevance. In fact, I think it's as relevant as ever. So that's great. That's really an interesting thing to do.